All right. We are live. Uh, Here are Stand Up Fight Back. Welcome, everybody, wherever you may be watching us from. My name is Carlos Marroquin. I'm a co host here. Unfortunately, our other two co hosts are not able to be with us tonight, but we have a very, very special guest. You are watching Stand Up Fight Back, where we discuss strategy, analysis of the progressive movement. Tonight, our guest is a good friend of mine, Susie Shannon. She's well known in California politics, up and down the state. She has a very, very strong voice when it comes to the issues, especially housing, and also amongst the progressive movement. Very well respected leader here in Southern California. We want to welcome you, Susie.
Thank you so much, Carlos, for having me on.
Great. I know that you're on the road, and I just want to say thank you for taking the time to be with us because, as you know, we are fastly approaching elections. Some people already, um, casting their votes by mail or what have you. But people need to be informed, and I think what a better person to have here with us tonight than you. There's so much. Uh, Votes that need to be cast some on different issues, on different measures, on different positions, different seats. So let's get started. But before we do that, maybe you want to say a few words regarding yourself a little bit, and for those people that don't know you.
Sure. Well, I think primarily people know me as an anti poverty activist. I have been involved in the Democratic Party since 2007 and basically got involved when I realized that um, poverty issues were not in the platform of the California Democratic Party. So I entered the party to try to be a voice as someone who is formerly unhoused and, whose family lived in poverty for a while, to be a voice some voice from the community in regards to making sure that people who are low income or homeless also had a voice in the party, and to make sure that candidates and people who were delegates in the party and people who are registered Democrats who really care about these issues, um, just reminding them of our values and that the party partially exists to help those who are underserved and underrepresented. So I started in the party based on that, and I had worked for 2 years. I started an organization called Poverty Matters in 2005, and have been working with our unhoused community since then. And so I'd been, trying to get candidates and elected officials to actually pay attention to a lot of the issues that now are at the forefront of these issues in California, and have just been trying to move folks in that direction, and trying to help people ever since then. And so um, I worked getting people, basically providing services to people who live on the streets and getting them into housing, and then working on policy issues. And so I drafted SB 1380, which is the state of California housing first model. And that basically says that people, um, would be moved into housing first and foremost, so they wouldn't have to go through shelters and transitional housing and um, into programs before they could get housing. That the housing itself was a stabilizing force. And then I started to work on rent control issues. And in 2018, I worked with Housing as a Human Right on legislation to basically repeal Costa Hawkins, which is a law that says that our cities and counties cannot enact or expand rent control. And so if we repeal that or reform it, it means that your local council members or your county supervisors can enact or expand rent control, which is really important because In LA, you have to live in a building that was built in 1978 or before in order to have rent control. And in San Francisco, you have to live in a building that was built in 1979 or before in order to have rent control. And for everyone else, we were seeing a lot of skyrocketing rents, increases in homelessness. Um, and so I have been since 2018 working with housing as a human right and is now working as the policy director, trying to enact or expand rent control, working on tenants' rights issues, and trying to stop the criminalization of homelessness while prioritizing homeless housing through adaptive reuse and the building of prefab modular housing from the ground up.
Wow. I mean, you are a powerhouse in all the sense of the word, because you being in the front lines fighting for these issues that we all care about, and you've seen a lot, and you had some disappointments along the road, fighting some of these issues, but you have never given up, and it's very important because, Susie, right now you have a lot of people that are pretty disheartened because they don't see changes fast enough. What do you say to people like that? That why this election, particular election, that are very important.
So, I mean, change can actually happen fairly quickly if enough people are elected into a body that, share certain values, or that can act. But you have to have a majority and you have to know how to count. So, from the time I started working just very closely with our unhoused community and on housing policy, it took 11 years before we were able to get housing first legislation in the state of California. And it required us bringing out people from Utah who had achieved housing first there. We had housing first in the state of Utah, which is a relatively almost exclusively red state in their legislature, before we had it in the state of California. So, I mean, what I basically say is this is a long game, and it takes a very, very long time to get legislation passed, as we've seen with single payer health care and a number of other progressive issues. And what we've also seen is that when we, do get legislation passed, you have to really keep track of what's going on, because there are people that will try to reverse all the gains that you've made. There are people who will try to whittle down, all of the accomplishments. And so, I just, I'm grateful and thankful to people who can contribute, whatever they can. But to really achieve change, this is a long game, and we have to be vigilant even after we get legislation passed that we want, to make sure even that it's, our legislation is implemented and that it's not watered down in future years. So this is, a multi-generational struggle where you're not only, struggling and fighting for probably the rest of your life, but that you're teaching the next generation and the next generation that they also need to remain, ever vigilant, because, it's like a pendulum and it swings back and forth. And if you're not, keeping an eye on everything, and you're not protecting the gains that, the progressive gains that have been made, it only takes another election to turn it around. It only takes the next generation to reverse all those gains. Um, and so, for me, nothing ever comes quick enough. We have 4 to 5 people dying on the streets of Los Angeles every single day. I mean, these are life or death issues. Who gets housing? Who doesn't? Somebody who is out on the streets, or just becomes homeless, and they, need insulin to survive, and they don't have access to a refrigerator. That in itself can become a life or death issue. So, it's very hard when people are dying, and I feel that same way because I'm also a single payer, activist that, people are dying and legislators are making these decisions. And, it comes down a lot of times to like who they're taking money from or who, has access um, to these politicians. And it can be really disheartening. But you have to understand these are lifelong, multi-generational struggles. And we're going to have setbacks and we're going to think that, we have supported candidates who are going to do the things that they said they were going to do, and that they're going to be very progressive. And sometimes they are, but, we don't have the majority. So it's a long game.
And
And
sometimes we even move them, to the left. We move them towards the issues so that they start voting the way we want to. And that
absolutely.
comes through a lot of hard work, relationships, talking to them, and just educating them.
Yeah.
So we have to have a game plan. It's not just all being out there in the streets or pointing the finger at them and say how terrible they are. Sometimes it's a matter of building relationships and talking to them and listening to them. And changes come like that.
Yeah. And it's so funny because, the Democratic Party is one piece of that puzzle. Grassroots organizing is another piece of that puzzle. Media is another piece of that puzzle. And if you look at marriage equality, it just seemed like nothing was ever going to happen. And President Obama didn't support it when he was running for president, and people made it very clear they didn't want it. And there were a group of us really pushing for it in the California Democratic Party platform to get that in there. And there were a lot of people who wouldn't support it, who are like big champions of marriage equality now. And I ran this like grassroots petition around getting it into the platform. And I remember people telling me they weren't going to support it because the president didn't support it, or they weren't going to support it because he didn't believe in marriage. It wasn't so much, marriage for same-sex couples. It was that they just didn't support marriage in concept. And of course, the person who said that to me is now married. So things can change. But part of it too, is, Hollywood. Part of it is the entertainment industry. And so, when you look back at sort of this arc for marriage equality, it was shows like Modern Family that really helped kind of, change what I call is sort of the trend, right? So how are things trending? And are they moving in all these different circles, right? Is there a grassroots movement? Is the Democratic Party, there or not there? And how relevant is that? And then, is the entertainment industry there? Like I've even seen a shift somewhat in the entertainment industry on the issues of people who are unhoused, right? So we're seeing more and more characters, and sometimes they're still, secondary characters who are becoming homeless. And we never saw that in the past. In the past, you'd see like movies or TV shows, and typically somebody who was unhoused, with a few exceptions, but typically people who are unhoused had like, very, were depicted as very scary people, or depicted as, folks who had, um, underlying like mental health issues that were very severe. And so it sort of, relied on stereotypes, and, writers will do that sometimes. But it's interesting because more and more I'm seeing TV shows where, um, main characters are becoming homeless. And I
Right.
think it's really fascinating to see that shift. But, if you don't have all the pieces of the puzzle, right? Sometimes it's hard to move things, like I would like to see like more television shows talking about single payer health care, or not criminalizing people who are unhoused. And I think that time is really coming. I think that more and more writers are kind of willing to take this on and not just focus exclusively on the middle class and on people who are housed.
Right.
Um, but
I
that
actually
is
have
also
seen,
part of this.
right. I actually have seen some shows. You see some shows now where they present a different angle when it comes to the unhoused. We see shows now that pretty much are at the forefront of climate change, where they are actually bringing the issue of climate change. Right? I remember a few years back that they disregarded all that, but
Yeah.
now we're actually seeing that. We're seeing shows that talk about um, even housing. So it's not a lot, but there's starting to be a breakthrough. And I think that part of that has to do with a lot of people know somebody that is being affected by this, including some of the people that have lost their homes because of climate change. Uh,
Yeah.
so all of a sudden that wakes up, it's a wake up call. And we see that with politicians that all of a sudden they start talking the talk. I know Bernie raised the issue of healthcare for all. And yeah, the Democratic Party put it in the platform, but they have not been fighting for it as they should. So, but I think that the pressures that we are seeing, in general, are moving some of these politicians to start taking a look at this in a different way.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me, like, I like to work based on models because I find it just easier to convince elected officials and the powers that be, whoever or
Right.
wherever they are, because that's constantly changing. Um, I like to use models, right? And so we can point to places where single payer healthcare has worked. We can point to places where, you know, um, housing people who are unhoused in a reasonable way where we're not spending, you know, $500 to $700,000 a unit like what we're doing now. um, we can point to these models. They tend to a lot of times be like Western European models. Um, but we can point to these models and we can say, these other countries have similar issues and they've solved this problem this way. Um, and it was interesting because when I was moving this, housing first model, everyone told me the governor would never sign that bill. It ran through the state senate, it ran through the assembly, and in each committee meeting, as each one came up, everyone was like, "Yeah, it's gonna pass." And we had like 100% Democratic support within the state legislature. But everyone kept saying, that's not going to pass. I mean, like it's going to pass, but it's not going to become law because Jerry Brown's never going to sign that bill, because he had vetoed similar bills before, which were a little different. They were, different department heads who would come together and meet. It were the ones that he had vetoed in the past. And so, because I was able to point to Utah as a model, and because we had been able to show the cost savings from that model, which were like 8 to 12,000 in Utah, but in California the savings were 45 to $55,000 per person that was homeless, chronically homeless on the streets. That's a considerable savings. And so when you're asked like how much is this going to cost and you say no, actually this is going to save the state money, that's a very powerful statement. And when you're able to point to different models that have worked, and different bodies, studies that have been done, it's really helpful, I think.
Right.
But that's why I tend to like default to models where it's worked, because a lot of times people can't even imagine the possibility of something happening, and you just have to show them like this works, here is where it's worked, and this is like how it's worked, to solve these problems. Most of the things that we're dealing with, which are kind of number one, number two, number three issues, have been tackled. Climate change is a global issue. but we know what the solutions are. I think there's
Right.
just not the political will, know that it's going to take certain lifestyle changes to address. It's that willingness as well. But I used to work on these issues because for 10 years, I worked for an environmental company, and we were dealing with what was then global warming, called global warming, and basically trying to get people to um, convert to environmentally friendly products or products that were energy efficient. And this was back in the 90s. So when I say to people, this is a long game, I started in 1992 working on environmental issues at Eco Expo and the Green Business Conference. And we went all over the United States. We did trade shows, consumer shows, green business conferences, just tackling all of these issues. And now they're at the forefront. But
Right.
if they were at the forefront in 1992, when we were sort of like the pioneers trying to get people to um really buy a lot of these products, um that could have helped save the planet, it is very frustrating, but you can't give up. I mean, we
Right.
see what a huge movement now, the climate change movement is. And we see, this younger generation who, are trying to be, or are, I should say, the stewards of our planet, and doing everything they can to hold people accountable and to, address these critical issues. So
Yes.
there
Exactly.
is hope, and there's
Yes.
always hope.
I mean, we
And we
we
just
see.
need to keep pushing. And
Right.
we just also need to understand there's always going to be setbacks. There are going to be elected officials who are champions and are heroes who are going to let us down. And, you still have to keep working with most of
Right.
them, right? Um,
Exactly.
there are going to be people in the movement who are going to let us down. And we just have to understand that we have flawed systems. We have flawed elected officials. We have human beings are flawed, and you just need to understand that all kinds of things are going to happen in the midst of running a campaign and trying to get legislation passed and trying to see real change. And then even after that, you still have to be ever vigilant moving forward to make sure that everything you've done and all the work that you've done doesn't get unraveled. Um, and I think I've just been very lucky because I knew a lot of 60s activists who worked mainly on anti war issues, and some who worked on housing issues too. And they were in it their entire lives. I think there was an understanding. I mean, I think maybe if I had any criticism, it would be maybe they needed to work a little more in passing the baton to the next generation. Um, but I do think, they were in it for their entire lives, and they just understood that. And I think we need to understand that too. Um,
Exactly.
so,
Exactly.
I get a lot of setbacks, even in legislation, that I've worked really hard to help pass. And, they're always going they're always going to be, forces, and they're typically moneyed interests and corporations that have a lot of money that are very good at lying to voters,
Right.
that are going to come along and try to reverse all the work that you've done. And, then you're just back in it.
All right. Yeah, and you're correct about all that, and I'm glad that you are sharing this with us. You're watching Stand Up Fight Back. We hear it every Sunday. Our guest is Susie
Hello.
Shannon.
Oh, Carlos, I can't hear you.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? Let me see. All right. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Susie, can you hear me? So Susie's on the road, and we are with her today talking politics and talking about the upcoming elections and trying to connect all the dots that that exist when it comes to politics. Can you hear me now, Susie? Yeah, Susie's having some technical difficulties, but she's on. She's still on. And in the meantime, we are reminding you that we have the elections coming up, and so many issues that we care about are on the line. And this is why we want to be able to talk to you today and encourage you not to give up, continue to get out there, vote, support the different candidates that are out there fighting for the people. Can you hear me now, Susie? Yeah, let me go ahead and send her a message, but yeah. All right. Yes. So again, we have a lot of measures that are coming up. We have, of course, the race for the LA mayor, etc. So very important for you to do your part and support candidates that are fighting for the issues that we care about, particularly the ones that affect so many people, so many of us. um, we also have great candidates that are going for some big seats, and they have a great chance for winning. So, Susie, can you hear me? All right. So while we get Susie back on, she's on. We just cannot. She cannot hear me for some reason. But I'm in touch with her via text message. She's on. Hello, Susie. Yeah, I can hear her. Um,
Hi, Carlos. So I can't hear you, but I'm happy to talk about
yes,
some of the ballot measures across the state.
please do.
Um, so I will start with the city of Santa Monica and move up, up the state. So in a few places, we are working to basically bring more money so that we can build or utilize adaptive reuse, which is taking existing buildings that have empty units and converting them for primarily homeless housing. And so in Santa Monica, we have a bill, GS, G is in girl, S is in Sally, GS, um, that we're supporting. And what that bill does is it provides a transfer tax, and that money then will go to affordable housing. And what a transfer tax is when a building is sold in Santa Monica for $8 million or more, a small percentage of that money will go into a fund for affordable housing. And so it will likely generate, estimated, about $50 million a year in the city of Santa Monica for affordable housing. And so obviously, a lot of real estate interests are against this, and developers. But there should, we're hoping there'll be a lot of support for this. There's a huge campaign that was launched in the city of Santa Monica, mainly spearheaded by the mayor, Sue Himmelrich, and her husband, Mike Soloff, who used to be on the housing commission there in Santa Monica. And so we're hoping that that passes because it'll put a considerable amount of money into affordable housing. So if you live in Santa Monica, we're hoping that you will support that. There's also a measure in Santa Monica, Measure RC for rent control, RC, which will lower the amount of rent increase to 3%. And this is really important because a lot of people are struggling, obviously. And for people who live in rent controlled apartments, they typically cannot afford a lot. And so making sure that we're capping a rent increase, because it's currently, I think, 6%, but it can go up to 10%. To cap it at 3% is really, really important so that people can, they're that they are not expected to pay more, than 3% for a rent increase. So that is a Measure RC, and that is also on the ballot right now. So most people have received already their ballot, so you can vote for that now. Up till Tuesday, um, November 7th. So we hope that you will support those two measures in Santa Monica. Again, that's GS and RC. Um, in the city of Los Angeles, we have Measure ULA, U as an umbrella, and then LA for Los Angeles. And that is also a transfer tax. And for that, it's any building that is sold that costs over $5 million. There'll be a small percentage of that tax, of that sale, that will be taxed, that will go into an affordable housing fund. Very similar to Santa Monica. There'll be obviously a lot more money, but there's a huge need for affordable housing in Los Angeles. To give you an idea, we have something called RENA numbers, which is the Regional Needs Housing Assessment. And that tells you like how much housing you need at each level, whether that's low income housing, moderate income housing, or market rate. And so in the past 7 years, our housing element showed that we overbuilt above our needs over 70,000 market rate units. So that's for people who make a lot of money. And in fact, that's for people who typically make six figures, and they typically have to make about $10,000 or more a month in order to afford most of the market rate housing here in Los Angeles. And then it showed in the past 7 years that we underbuilt low income and moderate housing. And in the low income category, we separate out by low income, very low income, and extremely low income. And the extremely low income category is where we built the least. So we absolutely we're desperate for affordable housing here. We're desperate for housing that is specific to our unhoused community. And we do need to separate that out when we're talking about quote unquote affordable housing, because a lot of developers here, not just here, but across the country, they will create affordable housing units, but those units are not available to people who are unhoused because they create applications that basically mandate 36 months of permanent rental history, which means that you can not only not be homeless at the time that you are filling out this application for an affordable unit, you can't have been homeless for the past 36 months. Wow. So it's really important to understand that people who are unhoused are discriminated against. And so we need to make sure that we are building housing specifically for our unhoused community, until we can get some kind of legislation passed to show that there can't be any discrimination against people who are unhoused. And I have worked on that for a few years, and it's actually very difficult to find a legislator, who's willing to, recognize, housing injustices and that kind of thing against people who are unhoused, as discrimination. So please support ULA if you live in Los Angeles. It's very, very important that this passes so that we have money for affordable housing, and that includes adaptive reuse. I mean, it's very important because a lot of stuff that, a lot of these measures that have passed in the city of Los Angeles never included adaptive reuse.
Hmm.
And so that is where you have existing units that are empty that can be converted for people who are low income and unhoused. Um, we have 70,000 vacant units in the city of Los Angeles. We have enough vacant units in the city of Los Angeles to house every person who is unhoused in the county, which is 69,000 people in the county who are unhoused. We could house every single one of those in vacant units in the city of Los Angeles. So the money going to adaptive reuse is very important. The money going to build, from the ground up for affordable housing and housing for unhoused communities is very important. So please, yes on ULA.
Got it.
um, then in Pasadena, we have an extremely important rent control measure. And we do hope that everyone who is listening, who is in Pasadena, will support Measure H. And this will also lower the amount that people can be charged in rent increases, but it will also provide a lot of tenant protections and just cause protections. Um, and so this is, we have seen across California, from Santa Ana to Pomona, to a number of other cities where city councils have voted to lower the rent increases. And typically we get either 3 to 4%. In Pomona, it was 4%. Um, you know, um, in Santa Ana, it was 3%. And so, the percentage changes in different cities. Um, but in this case for Pasadena, which also includes all these tenant protections, it's actually a measure that's on your ballot, and that is Measure H. So we do hope that folks will support that. There is a huge campaign around this. There, obviously, the real estate industry, the California Apartment Owners Association, a lot of these groups, AGLA, which is the Apartment Owners Association of Greater Los Angeles, are all opposing it. They are sending out just lies. I don't even know how else to say it.
Right.
They're just basically lying on the mailers that they're sending out, saying that it's going to hurt the fire department. It's going to hurt, and it's just, I almost wish I hadn't even said that because you're just kind of repeating it. But they're trying to throw everything at this, every scare tactic.
Right.
And so it's important for, progressives and people who care about renters to really get out, really get the message out there to vote yes on Measure H. Um, then moving up the state to Sacramento, we have Measure O. And this is a measure that was put on. We had a similar measure that Joe Buscaino, who is a council member here in Los Angeles and who does not particularly care about our unhoused community, was trying to put a similar measure on here in LA, and the city council rejected it. And it's basically to criminalize people who are homeless in the entire city. And so there are wonderful group of people who are working to stop Measure O in Sacramento, and to stop folks from being criminalized. Um, and we all know, with criminalization measures, what that typically does is it doesn't help people get housing. It actually is a deterrent to people getting housing because you're spending so much money on enforcing these laws where people can't sit, sleep, or lie on the sidewalk or in parks or most anywhere. You spend so much money on that you're not prioritizing money for housing, and housing is really the answer for homelessness. Once someone has a home, they are no longer unhoused. And there's a lot of stability, and as we showed with Housing First, it saves a lot of money in addition to that. When you criminalize, you tend to move people from one neighborhood to another because as people, as the enforcement takes over in a particular neighborhood, they're moved to another neighborhood, then another neighborhood, and then another neighborhood, and then they're back to the neighborhood where they
Right. You're
started.
going from neighborhood
And
to neighborhood.
so, um, a lot of these sort of laws um, really hurt our unhoused communities in many ways, particularly if they're being ticketed and can't pay those tickets, and those tickets become warrants. Um, and then people could serve jail time. I mean, um, it's mean spirited. So on a humanitarian level, it's awful. Um, but it's also very costly to taxpayers. And I think if more taxpayers knew that, they wouldn't just, be supporting initiatives like this. So we are no on O. And they were lucky enough to get the letter O because no on O actually, is easy to remember. So in Sacramento, definitely no on O.
Right.
Um, and then we have San Francisco, which is an empty homes tax that we're supporting, which is Measure M. Dean Preston and a lot of his folks were responsible for putting this on the ballot. And this is very, very important because we have a lot of um, empty units in San Francisco. And I think they've reached a 15% vacancy right now in San Francisco.
No.
And so if you allow landlords to have vacant units and there's no downside to that, they will just keep them empty. Um, and I'll tell you how bad it is. So I said, we have 70,000 vacant units in the city of Los Angeles. But in a lot of places, even on Skid Row, in the Skid Row area, we have completely empty buildings. So we literally have homeless encampments in the shadows of empty buildings. We had one building, the Cecil Hotel, which had over 600 units that were empty for over a decade while homelessness continued to go up. But the Morrison Hotel, which was owned by a developer called Relevant Group, that promised in 2016 to create 111 replacement affordable units, never happened. And this hotel is still vacant. I mean,
Oh,
we say hotel, it means residential hotel, which was designed for people who are very low income. And then we have these all over. So it's the same thing in San Francisco. You have empty buildings, you have empty units while homelessness is increasing. So anyone looking from the outside in could say, this is insanity. You literally have enough space, but landlords are reluctant to rent out to folks that they don't deem to be appropriate for their building. And I've had conversations with landlords, and some of the things that they say is quite shocking. But some of them will tell you, particularly for developers who have created new buildings, they will tell you that if they have a market rate building, they'll make a profit even if their building is half empty. And a lot of times when it's just like an investment package where a lot of investors have come into it, the value of that building is based on what they can charge for rent, not necessarily that every single unit is rented. So it's very important to support Measure M in San Francisco. This is a way that we're going to hold landlords and developers accountable for keeping these units vacant while homelessness keeps going up. And I think that's about it. And then I would say on statewide propositions, there are a lot of them, that are good or bad. I think no on 27 is actually extremely important. And this is the online gaming proposition. Um, that those, the online gaming will really get targeted to lower income communities. And we are worried that that's going to have a significant detrimental impact on people who may have gambling addictions. And this will just make it easier for them to sort of access where typically you'd have to go into some place. And we're just really worried that that's going to have like a huge impact, particularly on a detrimental impact on low income communities. So um, we're also no on 27. And I think that covers most of the ones that, we're really pushing campaigns on.
Got it. Well, thank you, Susie, for your time. Is there anything else that you see that we may need to be paying attention to? I know she's having a difficult time hearing me. I can hear her, but again, Susie Shannon, she's an expert in housing, a progressive voice here in Southern California that has been fighting for the unhoused, poverty, and housing. Just gave us a list of the different measures that affect the housing and the unhoused. So we're very fortunate to have her with us and give us some of that information that is critical. Yeah. All right. And as you know, right here in LA, we have the mayor's race. We have a billionaire, Mr. Caruso, and Karen Bass. Of course, we are supporting Karen Bass, no to Caruso. He's buying the election. He spent already over $80 million trying to buy the mayor's seat. Um, he's part of the problem. He's a huge part of the problem because, as you know, as a developer, this is the very problem that we've been having at City Hall. City Hall is controlled by developers. So we are saying no to Mr. Caruso. All right. So unfortunately, Susie cannot hear us. I'm having difficult time right now with trying to get her back on. Um, so if you just give me 1 second, I'm trying to see if we can get connected back with her. But outside of that, we also have a city council seat that is really critical. Let me see. Give me 1 second. She's signing up. Yes. So another seat that is critical is over at City Council number 13. We have, of course, Hugo that is running for the seat on 13, and his numbers are looking pretty good, but he needs an extra push. So we ask you to continue to support and do whatever it's going to take. We are here trying to get as much information as possible to you. It's been a little hectic for the past few weeks. Everybody's scrambling, trying to get support. I'm talking about the candidates. So many candidates that we have that are good candidates that are trying to get support. Next in next few days, we're gonna come back live with you and go over every single measure and the different candidates that are running and give you more information. Tonight, I'm here by myself with, I had our guest, Susie Shannon, an amazing leader here in Southern California. We talked about housing. My co-hosts are not here tonight, for until next week, but we're gonna see if we can have a special date that we are going to be coming up live to you to be able to give you and go down the list of the different measures, propositions, and the different candidates that we are supporting and that are really putting a big dent on politics here in LA. We already have seen enormous changes taking place, but people are tired. People are tired that uh, changes have not come. We spend billions of dollars already on housing, and we have seen little. There's been little results to all the money that has been spent. Another another race that we are watching is the one for the LA sheriff. We are not supporting the Sheriff Villanueva. He went back on his word after he got the support of the progressive movement. He pretty much became a right winger. and we are saying no uh, to Sheriff Villanueva. So again, join us later on this week. We are going to be posting a date and time when we are going to go over some of the other measures and candidates. We hope to have also other candidates to join us and talk about their campaign. See where they're at, and what they're looking at in these last few days before the election. But if you're getting already your ballots through the mail, make sure that fill them out. If you have questions, ask. Don't just go down the line, just crossing or checking out every square. Make sure you know who you're voting for. Only because they say that they stand for something, that necessarily means that they that's the fact. uh, See where their money is coming from, who's supporting them, who has sponsored these campaigns. Because again, big money is all over the place in the LA politics, in California. And so we got to be paying attention, and we got to be making sure that um, those people that we are supporting are pretty much in line with the issues that we care about, and that they are not being sponsored by big money, because that is the problem in the LA politics or California politics or in general. Is big money is the big problem, and they should be throwing a lot of money around to some of these candidates. We are also supporting, as you know, we had our guest Angelica Dueñas. She's running on the District 29. We are big supporters of her, so we ask you to continue to give her some of the support. So you have been watching Stand Up Fight Back, where we discuss strategy and analysis for the progressive movement. We come here every Sunday at 7 p.m., 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Uh, Watch us again next Sunday. But again, we are going to be announcing a date where we're going to be discussing LA politics, California politics, and the different measures, including some of the seats that are for grabs on the federal level. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to share the videos. We appreciate your continued support. Good night.